New Orleans Saints offensive lineman Trevor Penning shows important improvement against the San Francisco 49ers. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net, which is now live. Make sure to go and check it out. And, of course, as the Saints analyst over at WWL TV. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to be taking a look at why I still need to see more from this New Orleans Saints offense before I'm fully bought in on its effectiveness. I'll tell you why. We're going to dive into Taysom Hill being an important factor and finally being treated like it. But we're going to lead everything off today with our kickoff, which is going to be Trevor Penning, who showed some important improvements against the San Francisco 49ers on Sunday. We got all of that coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And is brought to you by your friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel's got something really exciting right now. Right now, through September 22nd, all customers, any customer, can put $5 down and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube or YouTube TV. Just head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. After rewatching the game a couple of times and going through the tape and the film, we'll have a film study for the insiders here later on today. I thought that Trevor Penning showed vast improvement, or at least intelligible improvement. Let me say it that way. Intelligible improvement going up against the San Francisco 49ers. When I say intelligible improvement, I just mean improvement that you can see, that you can mark, that you can understand, right? Not intelligible about him. It's more so for me, right? It was intelligible for me to see that there was some improvement. So what I did was that I went through all 33 of his snaps, and for the show here, I marked down which were wins, which were losses, and which were stalemates. Now, I want to be clear. I tried to be very hard on my grading with this. If Trevor Penning got walked back at any point and didn't find a way to rebound, it was a loss. If he got help from somebody else, it was a stalemate, unless he finished that play by putting the defensive player on the ground. That I would always consider a win. Anytime you get a defensive player on the ground, it's a win. I looked at running plays and passing plays all together because it all tells the same story. And I looked at the plays regardless of who was lined up next to Trevor Penning, right? So I tried to be pretty tough on this. Here's what I walked away with. On his 33 snaps, one was a penalty, not on him. No penalties in this game. One was a QB kneel, so I removed those. So out of the 31 snaps I got, 12 wins, 5 losses, 14 stalemates. Not bad. And a lot of people would consider stalemates for an offensive lineman a win, by the way, because in some cases, a stalemate is literally that the offensive lineman and the defensive lineman lock horns and no one moves. Nobody drives, nobody pushes, no one gets walked back, nobody goes back on their heels, no one loses leverage. Both of them just do their technique to the fullest and stay right there and just fight and fight and fight and fight until the play is over. A lot of people would consider that a win for an offensive line. But again, I wanted to be a little bit tougher on this, so I split out wins and stalemates. Otherwise, we would be talking about very lopsided numbers here that no one would, that not even I would believe. I would have to go back and rewatch the tape for a 17th time. And the numbers, in terms of the raw numbers, beyond my opinion of those snaps, in terms of eye test, do back this up, by the way. According to Pro Football Focus, only one pressure allowed by Trevor Penning in this game, one hurry. That is coming off of a game where he allowed 2 hits and committed a penalty in fewer snaps, by the way. 33 snaps in this game, 25 up against the Arizona Cardinals. Here's where I thought he impressed. Now let's get to the nitty gritty. I loved his recovery in this game. There were a couple of times where he started off a rep with a loss, but then kept fighting and kept fighting and kept fighting and actually turned it into either a stalemate or a win. I always get very impressed with that. If you see that 2 or 3 times in a first half, in a half of a game, so, 5 or 6 times throughout a game, or let's say 4 to 6 times throughout a game, that's really good, right? You think about like the equivalent to a cornerback. Think about Rico Payton actually against San Francisco. There was one play to where down the left sideline, he ends up getting beat because the wide receiver has 2 or 3 steps on him, but he doesn't panic, right? He utilizes closing speed, closes the gap, and then makes a play on the football. Trevor Penning doing his version of that. At one point, a defensive lineman ended up getting towards the inside and getting some pressure there, but instead of him flipping over his outside shoulder and then kind of going into no man's land, he turned his body with the defender, got back underneath that defender, and then was able to win the leverage battle by getting underneath the defender. Really, really good stuff. So I think that was a good example of a place where he won. Now, there were a couple times where he was still beat on the inside. We'll get to what he struggled with here in a moment. Another thing that impressed me was his balance. I didn't really see him on the ground very much. That's good. That's a good sign. It's a good sign. One of the things that everybody always talks about with Trevor Penning is how much he sometimes ends up on the ground. Were there times where he ended up on the ground? Absolutely. But a lot of them, from what I can recall, were all run plays where he was jumbled in the middle of just a pile of football guys. You know what I mean? And so you're going to fall over in those situations. That's okay. I thought his pad level was much better in this game. Not a lot of examples of him. There were a lot of examples of him in the first game against the Arizona Cardinals, sinking his hips, getting his butt back. But then the moment that he ended up engaging with the defensive lineman, he would stand straight up. And then that's what ended up getting him toppled over at one point by a guy that was 6'3", 253 pounds versus his 6'5", 6'7", 325-pound frame. You can't have that. And I did not see that in this game. And I thought his level of aggression was much better too, to where anytime that he was engaging with a defensive lineman, instead of him straightening up or pulling back, he lunged forward. He ended up being the aggressor on a lot of his reps where he was actually making first contact. He read the momentum and the leverage of the defender and then attacked. And when he did that, I thought that he came away with some really, really good stuff. All right, now let's look at where he struggled, because it's not all roses and rainbows, right? We did have some losses in this game. I thought that the inside shoulder was still a spot where he struggles quite a bit, getting that wide base and pulling all the way back on the outside of his pass blocking reps. Sometimes he ends up losing on that inside shoulder. Saints started to kind of help him a little bit over on that part. And I think that ended up going a long way for him once he started to get that help, especially Kyle Hergel, who I'll get to here in a moment, the undrafted free agent out of offensive lineman out of Minnesota. And I thought there were the times, and I kind of jumped the gun here, but there were also times where he needed some help. Got some help from tight ends, got some help from the inside interior offensive lineman, all that kind of stuff. But that's fine. That's fine. You're going to do that in games no matter what and everything like that. But what I didn't see was the equivalent of last year, to where giving Trevor Penning help or giving the offensive line help last year. Remember, they were dealing with injuries, everything else that was going on, and they were just not playing well. Especially early on in the season, when they were giving the offensive line help from the tight ends, it was taking the tight ends and the running backs out of the plays entirely. That is not the case in Klint Kubiak's system. That's something I've seen that was very promising out of this game. I think that the run game is still very much his comfort. His comfort is very clear there. So when you start winning in the run game early, like the Saints did, it only builds the confidence that translates over to the pass blocking game. And I thought that his pass blocking as a whole looked much better against San Francisco than it looked against Arizona. Now he's going to be put to the test this weekend. I thought that, we saw him struggle against guys like Arden Key and Harold Landry against the Tennessee Titans to open the season week 1 last year. I don't know if those guys are going to play. I know that Arden Key's 6-game suspension just got reversed. Great for him. Great for him in terms of he gets to play. I don't know the details of the suspension. Don't come at me for that. But Arden Key got his suspension reversed. And so with that being the case, he's expected to be able to actually start week 1. So does that mean that he gets opportunities here, having not played in the preseason yet? Will he be in the game, game 3 against the New Orleans Saints this weekend? I think there's value in that, because then you'd be able to get a 1-to-1 comparison. Did you improve against a guy that you struggled against last year? Some of the snaps that were deeper into the game were with Kyle Hergel next to him. I thought Kyle Hergel, by the way, really impressive in this game, and really has been impressive the last 2 games. He is a guy, for sure, over the course of the preseason thus far, that has made a little bit of noise in terms of putting himself on the map and maybe, just maybe, being able to steal a roster spot on that offensive line, which needs quality depth. So all in all, I thought very, very good stuff from Trevor Penning throughout this game. Insiders, you'll get a film study from me later on today. If you're interested in joining the Insider program, just text Who Dat to 504-285-7473 or click the link in the description, joinsubtext.com/Locked On Saints, and we'll have much more for you over there as well. All right, coming up next, I want to dive into Taysom Hill's usage now, because Taysom Hill was treated like an important factor, which is exactly the way he deserves to be treated. Let's get to that as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Look, I don't know if it's just because I'm in Louisiana, but when I open up FanDuel right now, I can go to the NFL section. And when I go to the NFL section, there's an entire section of Saints odds, like an entire tab of Saints odds. You could look at the week 1 odds, which includes them being favored by 4.5 points up against the Carolina Panthers. Tyrann Mathieu, will he record 5 or more interceptions in the season? Will the Saints make the playoffs? Over under win total of 7.5. You could also dive into passing touchdowns, passing yards for Derek Carr, rushing touchdowns, rushing yards for Alvin Kamara, and much, much more. There's a ton of Saints stuff on here. So make sure you come and check it out over at FanDuel.com. And right now is absolutely the time to do it, because right now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube or YouTube TV. Then, with your YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. How cool is that? All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started and download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, family. Taysom Hill is an important factor in this New Orleans Saints offense and was finally treated that way by offensive coordinator Klint Kubiak in this preseason game. I absolutely love it. We appreciate you very much. As always, make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day for your second listen. Don't forget to go and check out Michelle and Vinny over at Locked On Fantasy Football every single Monday through Friday, giving you everything that you need to be the smartest fantasy football player in your league. Go and check them out today at Locked On Fantasy Football on your favorite podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube as well. Look, when I say that he was finally treated like the important factor that he is by Klint Kubiak, I don't mean that Klint Kubiak hasn't treated him that way before. I just mean it's refreshing to see an offensive coordinator treat Taysom Hill like the important factor and in the important role that he deserves to be treated in. It's just great to see. Taysom Hill was utilized all over the field up against the San Francisco 49ers and had such a consistent presence against the San Francisco 49ers that I think that it gives you a clear indication that he is going to have a major and important role with many, many, many snaps to be had per game throughout the 2024 NFL season. And if you're like me and you believe in Taysom Hill as a playmaker for your team, the guy that literally leads the team in rushing and receiving touchdowns combined over the course of the last 3 seasons, I'm not even including the passing touchdowns and things like that, this guy needs to be on the field. So many times last year, you've heard me complain about it before, so many times last year we heard, well, the game situation didn't really dictate an opportunity to utilize Taysom Hill. Every game situation is a Taysom situation. Simple. Have him out on the field. It doesn't matter, because you can use him at tight end, you can use him at fullback, you use him at running back, you use him in the slot, you can use him at wide receiver, and you can use him at quarterback. What do you mean the game situation didn't make sense to utilize Taysom Hill? Because Taysom Hill can be fit into any game situation. And we started to see that here from Klint Kubiak, who gave Taysom Hill 14 non-quarterback snaps. Never took a single snap at quarterback. 14 non-quarterback snaps. I want you to remember that number. Here's why. Because the average number over a 17-game period from last year that Taysom Hill was utilized in non-quarterback snaps. Now, this varied from game to game. This is an average. But the average amount of non-quarterback snaps that Taysom Hill took in a game last year over the course of 17 games was 18. 1-8. 1-4 on Sunday in a preseason game where he played like a quarter. You see what I'm getting at here? Taysom Hill was utilized just 4 snaps less in a single quarter of a preseason game, or a single quarter and some change of a preseason game, than he was utilized in every regular season game on average over the course of a 17-game average last year. Taysom Hill is finally going to be a real part of this New Orleans Saints offense and not just a gimmick. And I think that might be one of the big things that you kind of picked up on when it came to Taysom Hill kind of feeling a little bit maybe not so great about what his role has looked like over the course of the past couple of years. I'm sure you've heard some things like that. I mean, he even said out loud at one point during one of the training camps here recently when we were talking to him that he didn't necessarily like the way that things were handled in terms of how he was told what his role was going to be with New Orleans, but that didn't stop him from buying in and going out there and getting it done and stuff like that. So there was always kind of a little bit of maybe concern about, does Taysom Hill actually like the role that he's in? And I don't know that that had as much to do with the fact that he wasn't going to be able to play quarterback. I'm sure that that had a lot to do with it in terms of him not being able to compete as a quarterback with this team, and then also being committed to this team via a contract that then didn't allow him to go out and pursue quarterback opportunities elsewhere. That part I understand there being frustration with, if that's the position that you want to be playing. But look, he gets to play a lot of quarterback here in New Orleans, right? And so for me, the other thing that I thought maybe might be good for him in this offense is that he's treated like an important factor. He's treated like somebody that can impact the game, which he absolutely can. Again, the team's rushing and receiving touchdowns leader over the course of the last 3 years. Yes, ahead of Alvin Kamara in that number. So when he goes into a game against the San Francisco 49ers in the preseason playing a quarter and some change and playing fullback, halfback, tight end, and in the slot, not to mention his special teams roles and abilities and all those other things, that's pretty promising. Pretty promising to see. Because again, when you utilize Taysom in all these different places, and you're not just fixated on using him only at quarterback or more present and more with a greater emphasis at quarterback, then it doesn't matter what game situation you're in. You don't have to be in 3rd and 1 to put him under center when you can be in 3rd and 5 and have him in your backfield. You don't have to be in the red zone to put him under center or in the shotgun more appropriately when you can be just outside the red zone and utilize him at tight end. You see what I'm getting at here? The amount of things that Taysom Hill has been able to now do in this offense, operating out of the backfield, at quarterback, in line, in the slot, and out wide, just maximizes your ability to be able to put him on the field whenever the heck you want to put him on the field. And then things become even more complicated for a defense that's going out there and trying to match personnel because they see that 7 is in the huddle, but where the heck is he lining up? Is he going to, you can kind of tell if he's going to quarterback or not. But outside of that, where is he lining up? Is he going to the tight end spot? Is he going to the wide receiver spot? Is he sticking around in the backfield? Is he going to start at one and motion to the other? What does that do to a defense? You feel me? You see what I'm trying to say here? It just opens up a whole lot. And by the way, the Saints still in that preseason game, despite using him on 14 snaps, non-quarterback snaps, using him in 4 different places on the offense, leave alone special teams, they would have still had wide receiver as in out wide and quarterback as options in terms of how to utilize them in this game. And more, like if we're being honest, like there's other ways to utilize. You could have a tight end that's not necessarily in line, but that's a little bit offset and all these other things. Like there's a lot of different ways to utilize a guy like Taysom Hill. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how his role translates on a more full-time regular season basis, because he deserves to be on the field just as much as anybody else in terms of being a dude that's able to go out there and put points on the board, help you score, and help your offense move. And his ability to be able to move around also can help you counteract some issues when it comes to health, injury, and availability as well. For if you're down a running back or two, like the New Orleans Saints were in this preseason game, you can turn to a combination of not just Jamal Williams, but also Taysom Hill to help you out in the run game. When you have moved on from one fullback and you've only got one other one on your roster, but you don't want to overwork your fullback, you have Taysom Hill who can operate there. When you're dealing with issues and injuries, at tight end, because Juwan Johnson's on the injury list trying to work his way back for the regular season, and Dallin Holker has a pregame injury where he sprained his ankle, which is exactly what happened against the San Francisco 49ers, and you're down to just 3 tight ends, one of which just got back to the team that same week, guess who can help you? Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill is an important factor of the offense, and it's nice to see him finally treated that way. Coming up next, I want to dive a little bit further into the offense. New Orleans Saints offense put together a nice 16-play, 95-yard touchdown drive. They had a lot of great things to take away from it, but I'm going to tell you why I still need to see more. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. I'm going to tell you why I still need to see more before I'm ready to fully buy into what this New Orleans Saints offense can be in 2024. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here with us. Don't forget, we'll be back with you later on today. So the New Orleans Saints have a practice from 7 to 9 p.m. Central Time here in New Orleans. They'll be uptown. I think I said in uptown in an earlier episode. They'll be uptown at Ullman Stadium over in Tulane. Thank you for checking me on that. And so I'm going to try to go live from Ullman Stadium. If the internet's not working as well down on the field or something like that, I'll just come home and then go live. And then we'll still have a fresh episode for you Wednesday morning, but it'll probably be recorded and published in the morning like I'm doing today. So just a heads up about that. But we are going to move right back to 2-a-days because the Saints are back in practice all next week, all these other things. So the Saints are now officially back here in New Orleans. Lots of great stuff on the way here with them being back home ahead of their preseason game against the Tennessee Titans. All right, I want to tell you why I still want to see more, why I'm not completely sold just yet on what the New Orleans offense can be in 2024. And listen, I'm not trying to be like unnecessarily negative or anything like that. I'm just taking a step back a little bit here. I'm trying to view this through the lens that is not the same in which we looked at one drive against the Kansas City Chiefs last year and went, oh, they might actually have this, right? And so I'm trying to remain kind of distant and distanced from the idea of, hey, that 16-play drive proves everything, because I don't think it does. I think that the 2 drives before that are just as loud, right? Like unable to get anything off the ground, inaccurate throws, not necessarily in time with receivers and things like that, not operating on schedule, both in terms of getting behind the sticks, but also not operating on schedule in terms of delivery, timing, things like that, right? So like those things are still concerning. They're still concerning. And look, you can go out there and you can start a game with 2 bad drives, and you can have 4 really good drives after that and still win a football game. That's how football works. That's okay. But I think the thing that we're looking at right now, and that what we saw against the San Francisco 49ers, was a little bit more of their system, but it was still their vanilla system, right? And so I should explain this because Luke Braun and I talked about this over at Locked On NFL, and I thought it was really valuable. So when we talk about a team going out there during the preseason and running a vanilla offense, we don't mean just some random offense with play call sheets that you got out of a gumball machine and it's vanilla. It's what everybody else around the league is doing. You're running your vanilla offense, right? You're running the concepts that are foundational to the bells, the whistles, the window dressing, the eye candy, all the other stuff that you add and compound upon once you get into the regular season. But in the preseason, you're still running your base concepts. And so seeing the Saints struggle with their base concepts against second and third team defenses, that gives me pause. And I don't think that one 16-play, 95-yard drive, as nice as it was, you can check out yesterday's episode. I raved all about all the good things that were in there. I don't think that it's enough yet to say that's who the New Orleans Saints are. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for them to be able to prove that. Now, look, I think that they're going to be aided by the fact that they're going to have a stout and very effective defense again in 2024. One that might be better than the one in 2023. I'm not sure yet. I think that they'll be helped in that way. I think that the system itself looks good based upon what we're seeing in training camp. The issue with seeing a system in training camp is that it can look different. It can look aesthetically pleasing, but that doesn't mean that it's better in terms of execution. Doesn't mean that it's better in terms of the way it's being coached. We don't know that until we see it on the field. That's just the reality of where things are. And the New Orleans Saints coaching staff has been upgraded, in my opinion, over on the offensive side. I know people love to rag on Dennis Allen and all this other stuff, but he doesn't have a lot to do with the offense being coached. Klint Kubiak and Andrew Janoko and these other guys that the Saints added over on the offensive side, that's their job. Their job is to implement that. Dennis Allen's job is to oversee all of it and make sure that things are happening and make sure that things are on track and all this other stuff. And I'm sure he has his opinions and his thoughts in terms of what he can contribute there. He's coached against this type of offense his entire career. So I'm sure he has insights, recommendations, things like that. in terms of how a defense is looking at what's being shown, all this other stuff. So there's valuable sharing of information there, don't get me wrong. But it's not like Dennis Allen's over there saying, all right, Derek, here's how you run, this wide zone concept. No, no, not at all. And so I think that there's a lot of positive that should be here, right? The coaching staff is upgraded. The system is good. The system is aesthetically pleasing. The system is refreshed and new and different in that there is motion, there is play action, there is the outside zone run, there is a certain utilization of playmakers like we just broke down when it comes to a Taysom Hill. There is a real commitment to establishing the run game in order to open up the rest of the game without a lack of acknowledgement that the passing game also impacts and can be positive for your run game. It's all there. And again, going all the way back to the first week of training camp, they have rules over the offensive side that help them be able to dictate what it is that they do as a unit, all 11 players with the same understanding based upon what they see a defense do in terms of last-minute shifts, adjustments, changes. That's all valuable. But can they execute it? And beyond can they execute it, my other biggest question around this team right now is can they stay healthy? Because I haven't seen much evidence of that so far throughout training camp. I think John Sigler over at Saints Wire did a whole running spreadsheet of injuries, and I counted more than 30 players that at least missed a practice with injury throughout a few weeks of training camp. And we saw a fresh, new absence just about every single day of training camp out there on the West Coast. Now, the Saints might have just been playing it safe, being precautious, all this other stuff. But when your being precautious turns into players missing more than a week of training camp when they should be on the field executing and learning how to execute their new offense, I'm going to have questions about how those players are able to execute the offense once they get thrown into the fire in the regular season. The Saints didn't finish installing their entire offense until just about the last practice before the Arizona Cardinals game. A lot of players missed a lot of practices during that time on that side of the football. Now, a lot missed on the defensive side of the football too, I understand, but that is at least something that maybe isn't necessarily a cause for concern, but piques my interest a little bit, right? Gets me asking the question, gets me raising the old eyebrow and going, what do we really know here? So I think that my questions around the New Orleans Saints and their offense will not be able to be answered during the preseason, during training camp, during practices. It's going to be answered during the regular season. And what I've seen in practice so far is a good system, but I've seen and had my concerns about their ability to execute it. So let's see what happens once they get into the regular season. And especially because they're going to get early tests against the Dallas Cowboys, the Philadelphia Eagles. The Atlanta Falcons defense has seen some upgrades, so that will be a little bit of a challenge for them as well. And then week 5 up against the Kansas City Chiefs. If they can weather that storm of 4 games after the Carolina Panthers game, which, by the way, they must win in order to set themselves up for that run of 4 tough games. If they can weather that storm, I think they're going to be just fine going through the regular season. If they can't, things get really dicey really quickly for a team that would then have a lot of pressure on it and a big need to turn things around quickly. And that amount of pressure with the new offensive system might not mix very well. That might be water and oil for this team. So we'll see how things go. I'm not saying that the Saints are going to be bad. I'm not trying to do anything like that. That's not my thing. My only thing is I'm still waiting for more information. And then we'll get a real idea of what this team is going to look like. But I just don't feel like the Saints even have the opportunity to provide that information until the season begins. All right. We'll be back with you later on today. Post-practice New Orleans Saints at Ullman Stadium at Tulane. You know what I always say. If you see me, say hi if you're out there. And of course, we'll be back with you at that point and all throughout the week. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.